Good morning. Welcome to ConnectFX 2018. For those of you who I haven't met yet, my name's Trent Derr. I'm the President and CEO of Liquid Frameworks, and we're thrilled to have you here today. Since so much of what we talk about at this conference talks about change, I thought this quote from Tony Robbins was applicable. And the key is we all know, and you all know, that in order to implement change, it takes a concerted effort for that to be a positive change or to be progress. You know, the old saying of you build it and they will come usually doesn't work out all that well. And what it really takes is real progress takes a real concerted effort or takes real focus. So if you look at the three key elements that are always in place when you have successful changes, you always have to have leadership and resources. Without that, there's really no reason to proceed with any kind of change effort, right? Well, then there's the execution side. How do you actually create new processes? How do you get stuff done? Well, that's the project management side. And then finally, there's the change management side, or how do you get those new processes to stick? It really takes all three of these for effective change to work, and all three are critical. So let's look at the way these overlap. As we mentioned, at a base level, you have the executive engagement or the executive support. You have to have that to do anything. And then you have the project management side, the actual execution of the tasks that actually help you create new processes, implement new systems. And this is a flow that's a pretty typical phase approach to any sort of project. Well, then there's the middle part, the change management part, which often tends to be the most difficult part because it's the people side of change. It's actually getting them to adopt and use new systems, new techniques, new processes. Part of the reason why the change management side is often difficult is it's often viewed as training. We all know that there's a huge difference between learning something and adopting something, learning something and believing in something, right? Well, the change management side is to get the end users to not just learn it, but to believe it and to support it and to adopt it. It's a lot like when you have a goal of eating healthy. Eating healthy isn't a diet, it's a lifestyle, right? If it's going to stick, it's a lifestyle. Well, change management is much the same way. It's not a one-time training event. It's not, hey, learn this, but it's an ongoing process in which people learn and adopt new things and support them over time. So let's look at some of the different outcomes that can occur when you look at that balance between project management and change management. At some level, you could have excellent project management. You could create new processes that dramatically improve your business. But if you don't invest the right amount in change management, you can wind up with failed adoption. You could also have the other end of the scale. You can invest really well in change management. Your end users could know what's going on. They could understand the new processes, but you didn't invest well in the execution side or in the project management side. And so you didn't wind up with really new improved processes. So then you wind up with failed transformation. And then that balance is when you have the right balance between investing in project management and investing in the people side of things and change management, then you actually get the outcome we're all shooting for. You get process excellence and you get adoption, which is, of course, the outcome we all look for. So let's look at some of the consequences of change management not going as well as we might anticipate. Well, at one level, you can have project delays. If the end user base ultimately doesn't adopt what you're rolling out, it usually causes you to go back and revisit things, rework things. It winds up being a delay, winds up being costly. Second of all, if end users don't know how to use a new process correctly or a new system correctly, they'll figure out how to use it incorrectly. And if that persists for a long enough period of time, then you wind up with reversion, where users will just go back to doing what they were doing before. They'll go back to using paper, they'll go back to using spreadsheets. And ultimately, the outcome of all of that is you don't achieve your business case. The whole reason why you started the change management process or implemented in the new system, you don't get any of those benefits. So all of those consequences are realities that I think we've all seen in different situations. But the interesting side of it is, depending upon the part of change management that didn't exactly go as well or as expected, you get entirely different behaviors out of your user community. Of course, if you execute change management really well across the board, you get successful change. It works. But Without proper awareness, your user community shows confusion. Without proper desire, your end user community shows resistance. They push back. Without proper understanding, your end user community shows distress. Without the proper skills to do their job, your end user community shows frustration. And then finally, without ongoing reinforcement, you get that reversion we talked about, or going back to the way things used to be. So again, it's interesting that you'll see different symptoms out of your user base depending upon which parts of change management are or aren't working as well in a particular situation. So let's look at change management methodologies at like a 30,000-foot overview. There's a lot of change management methodologies. They're all pretty good. For instance, you may use Six Sigma in your own company for different processes. Just so happens Six Sigma is a very good change management methodology. There's many others. This happens to be one that has a mnemonic of add user. So you can think of that as advantage user. If you do these types of activities through change management, you're putting your users at an advantage. You can also imply if you don't do these as well, you're putting your user base at a disadvantage. But one of the things to keep in mind as we continue to talk about change management is, again, it's not just a one-time event. It doesn't just happen when you initially roll out a system. It's an ongoing process for your ongoing use of the system over time. Years and years after a system's implemented, there's still change management processes that should be in place because you're constantly having turnover, you're constantly having new users, you're constantly implementing new processes. So again, this is an ongoing life cycle. It's not a one-time event. So in the first phase, there's the awareness phase. In the awareness phase, what you're focused on is what are those key messages that I want to communicate to the user base about why we're even doing the change as a whole. And along with that, you're putting together a communication plan for how you're going to communicate throughout the life cycle of the project. Then you go to the next stage. The next stage is the desire stage. That stage is where you're getting the user base to understand why they should even support this at all. And the idea there isn't the idea of what I've sometimes heard as opt-in. Oh, we're going to get our user base to believe so much they're opting in. It's not that at all. As we mentioned earlier on, if you don't have the executive support behind this and it's not already decided that this change is happening and this is the way we're doing it, then there's really no reason to proceed at all. It's assuming you have that, but now you're working with the user base to understand their concerns, their fears, and communicate to them why this is ultimately positive. What's in it for them? Also at this stage, you're putting together a training plan. And again, keep in mind that throughout this whole process, you're still constantly communicating. One key thing to keep in mind about that communication is unless you think you're communicating too much, you're probably not communicating enough. And that's an underlying theme. Then you get to the understand stage, and that's where you're providing your user base with that core level of understanding that they need to know in order to be ready to learn the new processes. And one of the key concepts there is a minimum viable process. There's often a temptation in any kind of process change or system implementation that while we're doing it, let's cram in as much as possible. And from a change management perspective, that often isn't the best approach. People tend to adopt change better incrementally over time. And so often what you're doing with the minimum viable process is deciding for your initial rollout of any process or system, what's that base level of capability that you need to achieve your base results for the project. Then we move to the skill stage. The skill stage is all about giving your end user community the skills so that they're confident in their ability to do their job. And that's what you're looking for, is that confidence. One key concept to keep in mind is make sure you're always doing that in training, that end user training as close to when they're actually going to go live with the system, when they're going to personally start using it as possible. And again, similar to what we said about communication, unless you think you're training too much, you're probably not training enough. And then finally, we get to the reinforce stage. This is after you have your new process in place, it's live, users are using the system. And from that standpoint, one of the key concepts is make sure that there's overt communication to every user. If they have an issue, how do they get to their tier 1 support? If I can't sign in, if I've got a question, who do I call? How do I get that information? That's one of the key key areas of the reinforced stage. And then also your ongoing refresher training. As I mentioned, you're always going to have new users, you're always going to be implementing new processes, and so training is something that should really be available over time as an ongoing effort. So at ConnectFX, you'll see through all the sessions that change management is kind of an underlying theme. You'll see it on and on throughout all of the sessions that we have today. And one of the things you'll hear again and again is it's not just about configuring a system and getting all the project tasks done. You'll hear a lot about how companies have invested in that people side of change. The other thing you'll hear is how they've specifically assigned resources to make sure that their end users do have that confidence when they start to use the system so that they can proceed and be effective in their jobs with the new process and with the new system. The other thing you'll hear is about how their investment in ongoing reinforcement is actually giving them ongoing benefits out of the system. And so that payback's there. And then finally, it's never too late to improve. You know, even if you didn't initially do all the change management you might have liked to do, since you're constantly going to be implementing new capabilities, you're constantly going to have new users, it's never too late to do change management.